Chapter 11, Part 2. Eric, once he had recovered from Roy's comings and going, sat staring at the bedroom door and considered his situation. He was hungry, thirsty, dusty, and, of course, a dog. He was worried about his mum, who by this time would have his tea, and be worried about him. He was worried about Roy's mum. What if she came in? Roy, meanwhile, having laid the table at a phenomenal speed, even for him, was now eating his tea, and whenever his mum's back was turned, stealing Eric's. The tea was cold chicken, salad, tomatoes, and potato crisps. There were plenty of bread and butter, and, warming in the oven, an apple pie, which Mrs. Turner had sent. Roy's mum was in and out doing various jobs, emptying his bag, fetching frozen peas from the freezer. "Have some bread and butter," she said, as she passed his chair. And later, "Use your fork." Roy bolted his food and wrapped Eric's scraps in a paper napkin and crammed them into his pockets. When his mum went out to empty the pedal bin, he left the table and raced upstairs. Eric was on the floor beside the train set, with no great enthusiasm. He was pushing a carriage along with his paw. "Got you some tea," said Roy. He emptied his pockets and arranged the hankies with their contents on the bedside rug. There was a piece of squash chicken, some crumbled crisps, a flat tomato, and a ball of bread and butter. "Eat up," said Roy. "I'll be back." And he left. And that is a picture of Eric with his train, with Roy's train. Eric sniffed the food and discovered the full extent of his hunger and ate the lot. After that he continued his exploration of Roy's room. He found a headless action man under the bed and encountered a dreadful pong from one of Roy's socks. He found a comic on the floor which he began to read. Then Roy returned, this time with apple pie. Eric ate the pie and Roy watched. It was exciting, smuggling food for a friend, but more than that, Roy discovered it was surprisingly satisfying just to see him eat it. Roy said, "Hey, Eric, you could have pinched that ball." He was remembering the cricket match. "Run off with it, or fetched it from the pond, where it usually ended up. You could have—" "Roy!" "Coming," said Roy. He pulled a face, gave Eric a pat and left. Eric finished the pie and brushed the crumbs from his mouth. He resisted the urge to chew one of Roy's slippers. He snuffled once more under the bed. "I wonder if he'll bring me a drink," he thought. He practiced miming thirst with an exaggerated panting. He trod on a marble. Then suddenly, in the gloomiest corner of the room where the bed met the wall, Eric felt a wobbly sensation in his legs and had a strong conviction something was about to happen. Something did. Seconds later, he experienced the now familiar tingling, like a mild electric shock or pins and needles, in his paws and an itch around his neck. This was the new, or perhaps he hadn't noticed, the new buzzing in his ears. He shut his eyes. His body wavered in the air like a heat haze. In no time at all, Eric the dog had dissolved and disappeared. Eric the boy had emerged to take his place. Eric's first response to the change was to bang his head against the underside of the bed. He remembered the shrinking feeling he'd had at the baths. Of course, that was it. He did shrink when he turned into a dog. So where does the rest of me go? And enlarged when he turned back. And if he was under a bed at the time, he got stuck there. Well, almost. Eric flattened himself to the floor and with difficulty wriggled his way out. He looked around for his bag. When he opened it, he was dismayed to find his T-shirt tangled up with his wet trunks, his towel with dirt on it from his sneakers, and only one sock. With a mixture of concern, "What's Mum going to say?" and relief, "Oh, my boy," began to get dressed. Meanwhile, down in the kitchen, Roy's problems were increasing. At first his mum had been too busy getting the tea on for herself and his dad to notice him. Gradually, however, her suspicions had become aroused. But it wasn't Roy's actions that did it. The amount he ate, the speed he ate it, and the fact that he seemed constantly on the move. All this was usual. What wasn't usual was his conversation. In an effort to camouflage his own excitement and avoid his mum's attention, Roy had overdone it. "Had a nice day, Mum?" "Lovely tea." And "How's Mrs. Turner?" Especially "How's Mrs. Turner?" were simply not remarks Mrs. Ackerman was accustomed to hear. Finally, she set down her mixing bowl and studied Roy. He was loitering near the biscuit tin. The first thing she noticed were his grazes, elbow and knees, and then she applied the TCP. She noticed something else. "Roy, where's your T-shirt?" "I've got it on," said Roy. "I mean the one you went out in." Well," said Roy. "Stop mumbling. It's in my room." Roy shuffled uneasily. "I had this accident." "What accident?" said his mum, and then, "Go and fetch it." As Roy left the room, Mrs. Ackerman put the seal on her disapproval. "And take that cap off," she said. From now on, things moved rapidly. Roy arrived in his room and discovered Eric. He was sitting on his bed, reading a comic. Roy was openly amazed and secretly disappointed. Eric was shivering a little in his wet T-shirt and worrying about his lost sock. A conversation began. The subjects included the sock, the transformation, Hopper, Joan Spooner, and finally, how to sneak Eric out of the house. Then, bang, the bedroom door flew open and Roy's mum discovered Eric. Eric leapt to his feet. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Ackerman." And Roy said, "Here's Eric." Mrs. Ackerman merely frowned. "I had this accident," said Eric. He indicated his wet T-shirt. "Did you?" said Mrs. Ackerman. "Roy said I could wait here till it dried." "Did he?" said Mrs. Ackerman. "I didn't want to bother you, Mum," said Roy. Then Eric grabbed his bag and said, "Well, I'd better be going. Thanks, Roy." And on the stairs, Roy said, "Don't mention it." And at the back door, "See you tomorrow." After that, Eric scuttled up the road and Roy took his time closing the door. He made rapid efforts to anticipate his mother's line of questioning. She was waiting for him, arms folded, in the kitchen. "What's Eric been up to?" she asked. "His hands were filthy." And Roy said, well... And that is the end of chapter 11.